4 years old with my parents at a family friend's house. The night has come to a close and we are preparing to leave. As we move through the house, the front door comes into view and a tinge of anxiety arises as I contemplate successfully crossing that threshold. Suddenly, my thoughts are interrupted by our host, who reaches down, picks me up, and turns me towards this dreaded closet. Not this again. The fear in my eyes scream at my parents, help me, please. Nothing. The door closes. Inside, I'm surrounded by darkness and the smell of leather. Terrified, the hairs on my arms are at attention, my breathing sharp, shallow. Glued to the door, fearful of the horrid creature that I've imagined living there. I'm disheartened by the sound of laughter on the other side as if this were funny. Confused by the humor, crushed at their indifference, the sobbing starts. Eventually, the door opens. Relieved and disappointed, I fall into the arms of my mother, bawling unconsolably, for I had just re-experienced the stinging pain of a child unprotected and mocked. 2.5 years later, my father and I had just returned from a 2-year visit with his family overseas. Elated to be back in the loving presence of my mother, I quickly realized that not everyone was happy of my return. Up in my room playing, doing me, the lights go out, and I hear faintly, spoiled brat. My older brother, chief rival for my mother's affection, had put a pillow over my face and was suffocating me. I thought it was some sort of game until I couldn't move, and then I panicked and was transported right back to the closet where I was alone in the darkness. But unlike that experience, this time I couldn't breathe, and the potential for injury here was real, not imagined. So I struggled and fought to get him off me, but he was just too strong for me. Overwhelmed and exhausted, scared and devoid of hope, I gave up. I had absolutely nothing left. And as I laid there lifeless for what seemed like an eternity, he finally relented. Invigorated, I bolted to my mother, "Mommy, mommy, mommy," and relayed to her what had happened. And with a somber and perplexed look on her face, she said, "Oh, sweetie, he was just playing with you. He missed you. We all did." Appalled at the lack of action and scared for my life, I plopped down at her feet, confused and dejected, refusing to leave her side for the remainder of that night and many a night after that. Sadly, that was but a couple of the many experiences that wreaked havoc on my mind's ability to process and regulate emotion. My personality, my character, my ability to reason with reality was born out of the fickle womb of fear and hate. Fear of being overpowered. I had a strong dislike for bullies or anyone who dictated authority. On the other hand, I was an emotional wreck, totally dependent upon others for identity and acceptance. And for this, my preteen years, a blur, a haze of appeasement and conciliation. My rationale through junior high and high school suggested that I befriend only those to whom I was superior, physically or intellectually, removing any possibility of being dominated or one-upped. For the security of my fragile ego rested solely on the belief that none were greater. Delusional. So at 15, psychologically stagnated and socially inept, with all the wit of a burgoying 12-year-old, I foolishly, ignorantly offered my allegiance to the local bad boys, who, like me, were all emotionally illiterate. You see, I didn't have the self-esteem or the courage needed to stand on my own. what I now believe to be a direct result of the closet and many other instances where no one stood up for me. Acts that would have imparted value and worth into me, a sense of self. But that wasn't the case. And insecurity. Insecurity ushered me into the hands of outcasts turned rebels. And rebel we did. For we denounced any and everything authority, which consequently led to a few stints in the county jails, and eventually here. In hindsight, I see that my life was marred by the perception of lack that fear created. Fear had become the predominant determinant in my decision-making. I was either currying favor or avoiding conflict, all under the guise of street bravado, and had been carrying on this way up until recently, 4 years ago. 41 at the time at another facility, there was conflict between young men I knew, and leadership was needed. But instead of guiding this conversation towards peace, I was consumed by it. I yielded to the ego-driven impulses of youth, and a brawl ensued. After the dust settled, a trip to the disciplinary unit incurred for my actions, a painful truth had set in. That I had been operating on a level of men twice my junior, and this was unacceptable. It is said that change doesn't occur until you're 100% dissatisfied. Well, I had finally met that quota. And it was this new low that became the catalyst that propelled me on this journey of discovery. From illusion to truth, boy to man. Now, the first order of business was to identify who I was and was not. To get an accurate picture, I had to go back and pry through the aspirations of adolescence. And what I found were the dreams of a boy enamored with the philosophies of Gandhi and the tenacity of Malcolm. Girded with this vision, direction became clear. I was to lead righteously. But in order to do so, I had to come into alignment with correct principles, which meant I had to rid myself of the stereotypical ideals of masculinity, for they were rife with deficiencies. Mission at hand, I got to work. Isolated in the dungeness cells of the disciplinary unit 22 hours a day, I began my rehabilitations with 3 topics. The autobiographies of great leaders, which showed me what maturity looked like. Mannerisms, conviction. Spirituality brought comfort and inner peace through forgiveness, the relinquishing of vengeance. The intricacies of psychology expanded my mind, bringing clarity and insight, yet also revealed a rift. Resentment I didn't know I had towards my mother for not protecting me. This new revelation was nearly impossible for me to admit to myself, let alone to her, for she was my angel, my rock. But I eventually did, and I'm happy to say we have since mended those fences. There was one other book that I should share with you. Great book. Self Matters by Dr. Phil. Instrumental in bringing me to the realization that I mattered, that apart from the opinions of the naysayers, I hold value. And most importantly, that what's needed to combat an unhealthy need for acceptance is self-love, the accepting of oneself, flaws and all. Exposure to this information freed me from falsehood and shame, stripped away the masks and ideologies that had held me captive, and for the first time in a long time, without the crutch of social opinion, I felt adequate. A wise man once said, "I am not what has happened to me. I am what I choose to become." So today, this day, I stand before you with vision, new vision, and purpose. service, a loving and caring man without agenda, without the need for one's approval, but simply because it serves my heart to be so. And my worth isn't contingent on physical or intellectual superiority. I am blessed because I am loved. And in spite of my shortcomings, I refuse to be relegated to the shadowy sidelines of fear and hate. For fear, ladies and gentlemen, is an abstract concept unworthy of our affections. With that said, remember that unresolved issues in a child can greatly influence his or her ability to cope, to make sense of the world. Unchecked, these experiences can blur the lines of reality, sentencing them to a time of insecurity and suspicion. Therefore, let us be impassioned and vigilant in the safeguarding of the hearts and minds of our children and grandchildren, because we, ladies and gentlemen, our actions or inactions are their reality. Thank you.